Forget everything you know about human history. Imagine waking up in a world without language, without fire, without even the concept of home. Now imagine your ancestors didn't conquer this world with brute strength, but by doing something so strange, it changed the course of history. They picked up a rock and thought, "Welcome to the forgotten moment where thought and survival collided." Now open your eyes not to skyscrapers or glowing screens, but to a silent, wind-blown savanna in ancient East Africa. Gone are the comforts of the 21st century. In front of you, endless golden grasslands, the air heavy with heat and the coppery scent of blood. Something stirs in the distance. It's not a lion, it's not a baboon. It walks on two legs, its gaze sharp and unsettling. In its hand a rock, and then crack. The rock slams into a bone. Not randomly, not out of instinct. This thing is thinking. This is Protolucas, the craft brain. Not quite ape, not quite man, but the first daring soul to use a tool with purpose. And that tiny shift in behavior, it would snowball into civilization. Protolucas lived in a place where every shadow could kill you. Sleek leopards prowled the brush, crocodiles camouflaged in river muck, and every night, the chuckle of hyenas haunted the flicker of firelight. But in that chaos, something incredible was awakening. A mind was starting to stir. Before wheels rolled, before words were spoken, before memory had names, there was Protolucas, quietly planting the first idea that would eventually build cities, launch rockets, and invent memes. This series follows the strange, dangerous, and brilliant world of this half-ape, half-genius. Who were they really? How did they survive in such a ruthless place? And what spark did they leave buried in our bones? Because to understand where we're going, we sometimes need to go back not to kings and pyramids, but to a wild savanna, where one weird creature picked up a rock and accidentally kickstarted humanity. The story of Protolucas nearly vanished into dust. But in the early 1960s, a twist of fate unearthed their secret deep in a lifeless gorge, where the sun burns red into the rocks and the wind whispers through bones. That place? Rukuma Gorge, Tanzania. And the people who cracked open history? Not Lewis and Mary Leakey, but legendary fossil hunters Max and Irene Dwyer. It started with a jaw fossilized, weather-beaten, and suspiciously not monkey, but definitely not human. Something was trapped between two worlds, and that odd little jaw was just the start. Within days, the ground surrendered more. A shattered skull, revealing a growing brain. Hand bones designed for precision, not just grip. Leg bones built for striding upright. With each dusty fragment, the Dwyers stitched together the portrait of an ancient rebel, not merely surviving, but beginning to think. But the real surprise wasn't buried in bone, it was found in stone. Littered nearby were strange tools, primitive, yes but unmistakably deliberate. Chipped edges, impact scars, signs of shaping. These rocks weren't broken by accident. Someone had turned them into knives, and that someone knew exactly what they were doing. From that moment, Rukoma wasn't just another sunburnt canyon. It became ground zero for humanity's biggest mental leap. And Protolucas, once a footnote in obscure journals, suddenly stood as evidence that before humans ever wrote sonnets, drew on cave walls, or whined about Wi-Fi's shattered stone and changed Earth forever. Now imagine holding a rock. Feels useless, right? But to Protolucas, it was the key to everything. Around 2.5 million years ago, on a plain littered with bones and danger, someone bent down not out of boredom, not randomly but with intent. They chose a stone, then another. Smash. A sliver broke off sharp, deadly. It wasn't chance. It was purpose. A blade was born. This was the first tool, not a mistake, not a lucky break. It was surgery, with rock-scudding meat, peeling roots, cracking bones, stealing marrow. Every chip, a decision. Every edge, an idea. That moment marks the beginning of what we now call the Rukoma technique, the earliest tech humanity ever cooked up. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't pretty, but it was the first time life on Earth created on purpose. A mind, small as a grapefruit, had done something not even evolution expected. It chose to alter nature. Protolucas didn't just scavenge, they calculated, they crafted, they waited for the right bone, the right moment, the right smash. They turned survival into strategy. And the second that rock broke into a blade history broke wide open, instinct gave way to ingenuity, victim became creator. They didn't leave behind poetry or statues, just a sharpened stone. But with that, they began writing the rough draft of us. Now picture life for these early brainiacs. No houses, no fences, no please knock before entering. But they had something priceless, tribe. Small bands, maybe 30 to 80, a ragtag mix of proto-humans, much like modern chimps but with ambition. It wasn't civilization. It was chaos with a hint of community. Maybe they shared food. Maybe they took turns watching for danger. Maybe two of them locked eyes across a carcass and thought, hey, this could be something serious. No marriages, no laws, but there was loyalty, there was protection. By day, they roamed digging for roots, eyeballing carcasses, scavenging the leftovers of toothier predators. By night, when the savannah turned into a horror film, they retreated back into tree's ancestral instincts, clinging like burrs. Hyenas, leopards, and worse prowled below. And no, fire wouldn't help. These beasts didn't care if you had a spark. Protolucas lived on a knife's edge, balancing between the old life in trees and the new one on land. One foot in the past, one eye on the future, but then something quietly genius. A circle of stones, deliberate, arranged, not a hut, not a bunker, just a low ring of rocks that screamed, "This is mine." A crude idea of shelter, basic, but groundbreaking. This wasn't just about surviving. This was the very first seed of architecture, of territory, of belonging, a place to rest. A patch of earth that said, "Here, I exist." Imagine a world where you are the snack. No rifles, no campfires, no heroic poses, just a vulnerable, half-hairless ape dodging death with every step. This was the life of Protolucas in the grasslands of ancient East Africa. Forget the romantic vision of early man conquering the wild. At just under 1.5 meters tall, with no claws, no fangs, no safe home, and nothing to hide behind except courage, Protolucas was lunch on legs. Under the relentless sun, their body might as well have had a flashing sign, "Eat me." And when night fell, it only got worse. Leopards didn't care about your tool-making skills. Prehistoric hyenas hunted in coordinated squads, and saber-fanged cats could turn a skull into splinters with one chomp. Then there were the Nile creepers, giant crocodiles that hid in silent ponds, waiting for one thirsty mistake. One misstep, one careless slurp of water, and boom, extinct. No first aid, no backup, no heroic rescues, just silence. Yes, Protolucas had a spark of intellect their ancestors lacked, but it wasn't enough to bend nature to their will. Not yet. Every morning was a bonus round. Every full night's sleep was practically a religious event. They learned to read the grass, smell for danger, hear a predator's footfall before it happened. Their minds, like their stones, were sharpened not for war but for dodging it. We love to think of evolution as this brave, glorious climb. For Protolucas, it was more like an endless panic attack with teeth. They weren't building civilizations. They were trying not to become a side dish. And they weren't alone. Protolucas shared the savanna with other rising hominins, each evolving fast, each vying for survival in the same collapsing ecosystem. There was Homo traversastaller, more muscular, with better hunting instincts. Homo nimrarimor, socially advanced, better at teamwork. And Homo radianus, with skulls big enough to spark dangerous new ideas. There were no battles, no armies. But make no mistake, this was war. Quiet, invisible, evolutionary war. They all fought over the same shrinking resources. Drying water holes, sun-drenched shade rocks, leftovers from predator kills. Bird eggs, roots, even bones nothing went unclaimed. And while Protolucas had some brain power and a decent sense of community, their competitors were simply adapting faster. Stronger muscles, better cooperation, more efficient hunting. Slowly, subtly, Protolucas began slipping behind. Not in a single brutal moment, not in fire or blood, but over generations lost ground became extinction. Evolution didn't strike them down, it just moved on without them. And so the species that lit the match for human thought, that dared to dream of tools, simply couldn't keep up. Protolucas wasn't wiped out. They were outpaced, forgotten, overtaken by their own evolutionary cousins who carried the spark they ignited and ran with it. Their disappearance wasn't a cataclysm. It wasn't cinematic. It was a whisper. Around 1.5 million years ago, the planet started shifting its mood. Rain patterns broke, forests shrank, rivers died. The grasslands turned to brittle scrub. And for Protolucas, who relied so deeply on their habitat, it was death by inches. But it wasn't just climate. The real threat? Their own bloodline. Other Homo species were sprinting ahead. Quicker reflexes, sharper strategies, smarter hunting. Protolucas was a pioneer, but pioneers don't always finish the journey. They weren't fast enough to outrun danger, not clever enough to outthink predators, not coordinated enough to bring down prey efficiently. And worst of all, luck wasn't on their side. There was no fiery apocalypse, no sudden wipeout, just a slow fade-a-day after die as the last bands of Protolucas scattered across the ancient earth, shrinking into obscurity, not killed, just forgotten. Evolution didn't send a warning. It simply turned the page. Because the one who sparks the flame is rarely the one who gets to carry it forward. Protolucas, the first dreamer with a rock in hand, had reached their epilogue. Not because they failed, not because they lacked something, but because the clock of evolution never hits pause. As new species stepped forward into the unknown, the chapter for Protolucas quietly closed behind them. No one remembers what their voice sounded like. No one knows if they hummed lullabies to their young. No name of theirs is carved into any cliffside. But what they did leave behind is louder than words. The idea that a rock wasn't just a rocket could be change. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because they ran faster, not because they fought harder, but because they looked at a piece of the world and thought, what if I shape this? From that first deliberate crack of stone against bone, from that first clean cut to reach marrow, they opened a door no creature had dared to open before. A door that led to fire, to spoken thought, to shared memory, to art, to us. From then on, evolution stopped being a passive process. It became a choice, a conscious act of defiance. Protolucas wasn't the end of the line. They were the spark. The pilot flame that would one day become cities, symphonies, and spaceflight. They were the creature that stood alone on a dry savanna, holding nothing but a rockin' imagined a world that didn't exist yet. So, no, they didn't disappear. They live in your hands, in the fingers gripping this screen, in the thoughts behind your next idea. They live in every choice you make, every problem you try to solve, every dream you dare to chase. We are Homo sapiens, the ones who inherited their fire. And the question is, what will we leave behind? Today, we live in a world bathed in neon light, drowning in Wi-Fi. But sometimes, we need to shut it all off just for a second and remember the ones who started it all. The ones who picked up the first stone and saw more. From rock shards to smartphones. From savanna dust to crowded cities. From Protolucas to you. If you believe the key to facing the future is buried somewhere in the past, if you think every forgotten ancestor still whispers lessons through time, then you'll want to see what's next. Hit subscribe, turn the bell on, because the story isn't over. There are species no one remembers, dreams buried in fossils, and truths no one ever told us about what it really means to be human. We are the current keepers of that fire, the latest draft in a story written across 1,000,000 years.